August 7, 1942, as American forces stormed ashore at Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, few could have imagined that some of the most dangerous fighting in the Pacific would soon be carried out not by massive battleships or aircraft carriers, but by small wooden boats racing through the darkness at 40 knots, striking from the shadows and vanishing before the enemy even knew what hit them. When the Japanese Imperial Navy began its nightly reinforcement runs, later known as the Tokyo Express, to resupply and reinforce their troops on Guadalcanal, they relied on fast destroyers that could outrun American surface forces and slip through the narrow waters under cover of night. The United States Navy needed a weapon that could match speed with speed, stealth with stealth, and courage with audacity. That weapon was the patrol torpedo boat, better known simply as the PT boat. Built largely of wood, powered by powerful Packard gasoline engines, and armed with torpedoes, machine guns, and later rockets, these small craft measured roughly 80 feet in length, but carried the striking power to cripple or sink ships many times their size. Early in the campaign, PT boats were deployed to Tulagi and other forward bases in the Solomons, where their crews, often young officers and enlisted men barely in their 20s, began operating in some of the most dangerous waters in the world. Unlike battleships that fought in formation or submarines that stalked silently beneath the waves, PT boats depended on speed, surprise, and aggressive night tactics. Their crews operated in near-total darkness, navigating narrow straits, reefs, and enemy patrol zones with minimal radar support during the early months of the campaign. The Japanese Navy, highly trained in night fighting and equipped with powerful long-lance torpedoes, initially held the advantage in surface engagements. However, the PT boats introduced a new and unpredictable threat. On moonless nights, these small craft would idle quietly in likely approach lanes, engines throttled low to reduce wake, waiting for the silhouettes of Japanese destroyers to appear against the faint horizon. Once contact was made, PT commanders would push their throttles forward, engines roaring to life as the boats surged ahead at high speed, lining up torpedo shots before enemy searchlights could find them. The first months were chaotic and costly. Mechanical failures, coordination problems, and inexperienced crews sometimes led to missed opportunities or friendly fire confusion. Torpedo reliability also posed challenges, as early war American torpedoes suffered from depth and detonation issues. Yet the mere presence of PT boats forced the Japanese to alter their tactics. Destroyers conducting Tokyo Express runs could no longer move unchallenged. They had to zigzag, increase lookouts, and sometimes expend valuable ammunition chasing elusive attackers. On several occasions in late 1942, PT boats engaged Japanese destroyers in Blackett Strait and surrounding waters, launching torpedoes and exchanging gunfire at close range. While confirmed sinkings were limited in the early phase, the psychological impact was significant. Japanese crews reported sudden torpedo wakes in the darkness and unexpected bursts of machine gun fire, often unable to determine how many attackers they faced. PT boats also performed reconnaissance, rescued downed pilots, transported supplies, and inserted scouts along hostile coastlines, expanding their role beyond pure torpedo attacks. The harsh conditions of the Solomon Islands tested both men and machines. Tropical heat, humidity, and constant exposure to salt water corroded equipment rapidly. Mosquitoes, malaria, and exhaustion were constant companions. Bases were often little more than makeshift camps carved out of jungle clearings, with limited repair facilities and frequent air raids. Yet morale remained surprisingly resilient. The crews embraced their unofficial reputation as mavericks of the Navy, operating outside the rigid structure of traditional surface fleets. Their missions demanded initiative and split-second decision-making. A PT skipper might only have seconds to determine range, angle, and firing solution before either committing to attack or breaking off to avoid devastating enemy gunfire. As the Guadalcanal campaign intensified through late 1942 and early 1943, PT boats became more integrated into broader naval strategy. They provided early warning of approaching Japanese forces and occasionally coordinated with larger American ships to create layered defenses.
Although historians continued to debate the exact number of ships sunk directly by PT torpedoes during the Solomon Islands campaign, there is little dispute that their constant harassment disrupted Japanese reinforcement schedules and forced tactical adjustments. More importantly, the experience gained in these brutal early months shaped the evolution of PT boat doctrine. Crews refined night attack formations, improved communication procedures, and adapted weaponry to meet emerging threats. Additional armaments, such as 40mm guns and rockets, were mounted to enhance firepower against barges and smaller vessels. By early 1943, PT boats had proven they were more than experimental coastal craft. They were a legitimate offensive tool capable of challenging even the vaunted Imperial Japanese Navy. The struggle in the Solomons was only the beginning. What started on August 7, 1942 as an improvised response to Japanese night supply runs would grow into a widespread campaign of shadow warfare, stretching from New Guinea to the Philippines, where small wooden boats, guided by fearless crews, would continue to strike unexpectedly at a powerful enemy that had once relieved it ruled the Pacific night.
By early 1943, the shadow war in the Solomon Islands had evolved into a relentless contest of speed, deception, and endurance, as American PT boats refined their tactics against increasingly cautious Japanese forces who had learned to fear sudden torpedo wakes slicing through the darkness. Operating from advanced bases such as Rendova and later Green Island, PT squadrons extended their reach deeper into contested waters, particularly around Blackett Strait, Kolombangara, and New Georgia, where Japanese destroyers and barges continued desperate attempts to reinforce isolated garrisons. Unlike the opening months of the Guadalcanal campaign, when PT crews struggled with unreliable torpedoes and limited coordination, 1943 saw marked improvements in both equipment and doctrine. Radar sets, though primitive by later standards, began appearing on some boats, allowing earlier detection of approaching ships and giving American crews a critical edge in night engagements. Torpedo performance gradually improved as technical defects were corrected, and commanders learned to fire spreads at closer, more calculated ranges, rather than relying on long-distance shots with uncertain results. The Japanese, meanwhile, adapted by increasing destroyer speed during supply runs, using smoke screens, and deploying float planes for reconnaissance. Yet even these measures could not eliminate the threat posed by small, fast-moving attackers hugging the coastline. One of the most significant PT boat engagements occurred during operations in Blackett Strait in March 1943, when PT boats coordinated attacks against Japanese destroyers attempting evacuation and reinforcement missions. Though claims of sinkings were sometimes exaggerated in the confusion of night combat, the persistent harassment disrupted enemy movement and forced costly evasive maneuvers. Beyond torpedo strikes, PT boats proved especially effective against Japanese barge traffic, which had become a primary method of transporting troops and supplies under cover of jungle-lined coasts. Armed with 50-caliber machine guns, 20mm cannons, and eventually 40mm Bofors guns mounted on their decks, PT crews shredded wooden barges in close-range firefights that often resembled chaotic duels at point-blank distance. These barge-hunting missions were dangerous but strategically valuable, as they choked off the steady flow of ammunition and food to forward Japanese units, contributing to the gradual weakening of enemy positions throughout the central Solomons. Life aboard the boats remained grueling. Crews endured constant engine maintenance demands, as the powerful Packard engines required meticulous care and frequent overhaul, especially in tropical conditions where heat and humidity strained mechanical systems. Fuel consumption was high, limiting operational range and requiring careful logistical planning to sustain nightly patrols. Bases were frequently targeted by Japanese air raids, forcing PT personnel to disperse and camouflage their boats during daylight hours to avoid destruction.
Despite these hardships, a distinctive esprit de corps emerged within the PT community. Officers were often given considerable autonomy, and enlisted sailors performed multiple roles, from gunners to mechanics to navigators, fostering tight-knit teams bonded by shared danger. In July 1943, the hazards of PT warfare were dramatically illustrated when PT-109, commanded by Lieutenant John F. Kennedy, was rammed and cut in two by the Japanese destroyer Amagiri during a night patrol near Kolombangara. The collision, which killed 2 crewmen, highlighted both the vulnerability of the small craft and the extreme risks inherent in operating at high speed in narrow, contested waters. Kennedy and his surviving crew swam to nearby islands and eventually secured rescue, an episode that later gained prominence, but at the time was one among many perilous encounters faced by PT crews across the theater. As Allied forces advanced up the Solomon Chain and into New Guinea under General Douglas MacArthur's strategy of leapfrogging strongpoints, PT boats accompanied amphibious operations, screening landings, interdicting coastal traffic, and providing fire support against shore positions. Their shallow draft allowed them to operate close to beaches and river mouths, where larger warships could not safely maneuver. PT boats also inserted coast watchers and reconnaissance teams, evacuated wounded personnel, and even engaged in psychological warfare by maintaining an unpredictable presence that kept Japanese commanders uncertain about Allied intentions. By late 1943 and into 1944, the cumulative effect of PT operations, combined with overwhelming American industrial output and growing air superiority, shifted the balance of naval power decisively in favor of the Allies. The Japanese Navy, once confident in its mastery of night surface combat, found its supply lines increasingly strained and its destroyer forces overextended. Although PT boats rarely delivered the single dramatic blow of a battleship broadside, their persistent, mosquito-like attacks eroded enemy freedom of movement and compounded logistical difficulties across thousands of miles of contested coastline. In this grinding maritime campaign, speed and audacity proved as valuable as armor and heavy guns, and the lessons learned in the Solomons would soon be applied on an even broader scale as the war moved westward toward the Philippines and ultimately Japan itself, where PT boats would continue to strike from the shadows, embodying a form of naval warfare defined not by size, but by surprise, resilience, and relentless pressure.
By 1944, as Allied forces pushed steadily westward across the Pacific, PT boats were no longer experimental coastal raiders, but an established and adaptable component of American naval strategy, operating in New Guinea, the Bismarck Archipelago, and eventually the Philippines, in coordination with General Douglas MacArthur's advance toward Japan. The character of PT warfare evolved alongside the shifting front lines. Instead of primarily contesting Japanese destroyers in narrow island straits, as they had during the Guadalcanal campaign, PT squadrons now focused heavily on interdiction, reconnaissance, and direct support of amphibious landings. In New Guinea, where dense jungle met shallow coastal waters, Japanese forces relied increasingly on barges and small craft to move troops and supplies between isolated outposts. PT boats, with their shallow draft and high speed, proved ideally suited to counter this strategy. Operating from forward bases carved out of swamps and coral strips, often under threat of air attack, PT crews conducted nightly patrols along enemy-held coastlines, using radar and intelligence reports to intercept barge convoys attempting to slip through darkness. The boat's armament had grown more formidable compared to the early days of the Solomon Islands. Many now carried 40mm Bofors cannons, multiple 50-caliber machine guns, 20mm Oerlikon cannons, and in some cases rocket launchers, transforming them into versatile gun platforms capable of devastating lightly armored targets. Close-range engagements were frequent and brutal. PT boats would accelerate toward shadowy silhouettes hugging the shoreline, open fire with cannon and machine guns, and often destroy or scatter entire barge formations in minutes, sometimes at distances so short that crews could see individual enemy soldiers returning fire. These actions significantly reduced Japanese ability to reinforce bypassed strongholds, contributing to the effectiveness of the Allied leapfrogging strategy that left heavily fortified positions isolated rather than directly assaulted. Beyond barge interdiction, PT boats also conducted daring reconnaissance missions ahead of amphibious invasions. Before landings at places such as Hollandia and later Morotai, PT crews scouted beaches, charted reefs, and monitored enemy coastal activity, providing vital information to planners who depended on accurate intelligence to minimize casualties. Their ability to move swiftly and withdraw quickly made them valuable eyes and ears in contested waters where larger ships risked grounding or ambush. In addition to combat roles, PT boats performed humanitarian and special operations tasks that rarely captured headlines but were essential to the broader campaign. They evacuated wounded soldiers from advanced positions, rescued downed airmen forced into the sea, and inserted guerrilla teams and coast watchers behind enemy lines. These missions required careful coordination, precise navigation, and a willingness to operate close to hostile shores, where a single searchlight or well-placed artillery shell could prove fatal. Mechanical reliability remained a constant concern. The powerful gasoline engines that gave PT boats their speed also made them vulnerable to fire and demanded constant maintenance, especially in the corrosive tropical environment. Spare parts were often scarce at remote bases, forcing crews to improvise repairs and cannibalize damaged boats to keep others operational. Despite these logistical challenges, PT squadrons maintained an aggressive operational tempo, frequently launching multiple patrols per night to maintain pressure on Japanese shipping lanes. As the war progressed into the Philippines in late 1944, PT boats took on additional responsibilities during the Liberation Campaign. In Leyte Gulf and surrounding waters, they screened transport convoys, conducted night patrols to guard against infiltration, and supported amphibious assaults along the archipelago's complex coastline. Although the massive fleet actions of Leyte Gulf were dominated by battleships and carriers, PT boats contributed by securing flanks and intercepting smaller enemy craft attempting to disrupt landings. The Japanese Navy, weakened by earlier losses and increasingly short on fuel and trained personnel, could no longer contest the seas with the same confidence it had displayed in 1942. Nevertheless, PT crews remained cautious. Even a damaged destroyer or armed barge could inflict lethal damage on a wooden hull traveling at high speed. The psychological dimension of PT warfare persisted throughout these later campaigns. Japanese commanders were compelled to factor in the constant possibility of sudden nighttime attack, diverting resources to patrol and escort duties that might otherwise have reinforced frontline operations. For American sailors, the war had matured from desperate improvisation into coordinated, large-scale advance, yet the essential nature of PT missions remained unchanged: stealth, speed, and surprise. The boats were still small compared to the immense carriers and battleships dominating headlines, but their contribution lay in the cumulative disruption they inflicted, night after night, across vast stretches of contested coastline. By the end of 1944, PT boats had operated thousands of patrols, destroyed or damaged significant numbers of barges and small vessels, and played a quiet but meaningful role in tightening the noose around Japanese forces throughout the Southwest Pacific. As Allied troops pressed closer to the Japanese homeland, the shadow warriors of the PT squadrons continued to skim across darkened waters, engines roaring, guns ready, embodying a form of naval warfare defined not by overwhelming size, but by relentless initiative and the refusal to allow the enemy a single uncontested night at sea. By early 1945, PT boats had firmly established themselves as a versatile and indispensable component of the United States Navy's offensive and reconnaissance strategy across the Pacific theater. With the Allies advancing through the Philippines and the Bismarck Archipelago, PT squadrons adapted to increasingly complex operational demands, performing not only interdiction and night harassment, but also direct support for amphibious landings, intelligence gathering, and special operations behind enemy lines. The lessons learned in the Solomons and New Guinea were applied on a broader scale, and the boat's crews had become seasoned veterans, accustomed to the challenges of tropical warfare, rapid maneuvering, and split-second decision-making under fire. One of the notable aspects of PT operations at this stage was the coordination with larger surface combatants and air assets. PT boats frequently worked in tandem with destroyers, cruisers, and carrier-based aircraft to maximize the impact of their attacks on Japanese shipping and coastal positions. They would act as forward scouts, interceptors, or distractions, often drawing enemy fire while heavier units prepared to strike. The introduction of more advanced radar and radio communication systems improved their operational effectiveness, allowing squadrons to maintain contact over greater distances and execute coordinated assaults on enemy convoys. Tactical evolution also extended to the use of armaments. Early PT boat campaigns relied primarily on torpedoes and machine guns, but by 1945, many boats were equipped with rocket launchers, additional 20 and 40 millimeter cannons, and flamethrowers for specialized missions. This enhanced firepower allowed small crews to engage multiple targets simultaneously and effectively suppress shore defenses, a capability particularly useful during the liberation of heavily defended islands in the Philippine archipelago. During the Lingayen Gulf and Mindoro operations, PT boats played a critical role in night screening, convoy protection, and harassment of Japanese reinforcements attempting to reach threatened positions. These small, fast vessels could navigate shallow waters and river mouths, areas inaccessible to larger warships, and strike unexpectedly at enemy barges or landing craft. The psychological impact on Japanese forces was profound. PT boats became synonymous with sudden, invisible threat, forcing constant vigilance even in areas where the Allies controlled the skies. Life aboard PT boats during this period remained physically demanding and mentally taxing. The wooden hulls offered little protection from enemy gunfire or rough seas, and the high-speed engines, while enabling rapid movement, demanded continual maintenance. Crews faced heat, humidity, constant noise, and the omnipresent risk of fire or explosion. Yet morale among the sailors was bolstered by the effectiveness of their missions and the camaraderie that developed within each tight-knit squadron. PT crews continued to demonstrate remarkable adaptability. In addition to conventional combat, they conducted reconnaissance patrols along enemy-held coasts, dropped and retrieved intelligence teams, and carried out evacuation missions under the threat of enemy fire. Their speed and maneuverability allowed them to extract personnel from areas where larger vessels could not venture, often under cover of darkness or in coordination with stealthy aircraft reconnaissance. As the war moved closer to the Japanese home islands, PT operations extended further, targeting the remaining supply lines, harassing retreating units, and gathering critical intelligence on coastal defenses. They were instrumental in the disruption of Japanese logistical efforts, attacking convoys and barges, thereby reducing the enemy's capacity to reinforce or resupply isolated garrisons. Despite technological advances and accumulated experience, the dangers of PT operations never diminished. Collisions, mechanical failures, enemy fire, and navigational hazards remained constant threats. Incidents such as the earlier ramming of PT-109 by the Japanese destroyer Amagiri served as grim reminders that even the most capable crews were vulnerable.
Nevertheless, the adaptability, speed, and audacity of PT boat operations continued to yield disproportionate results relative to their size. Their effectiveness lay not merely in the physical damage inflicted, but in their ability to shape enemy behavior and constrain Japanese operational flexibility. By mid-1945, the PT boat campaign had reached its zenith, with squadrons operating across multiple theaters simultaneously, integrating lessons from the early Pacific campaigns and setting the stage for the final push toward Japan. The men who served aboard these small wooden vessels had, through courage, ingenuity, and relentless initiative, created a form of naval warfare that leveraged surprise, speed, and psychological impact to punch far above their weight. In the shadows of the vast Pacific, the PT boats had proven that size did not determine influence, and that daring, coordinated action could strike fear into even the most powerful naval forces of the era. Their legacy endured beyond the immediate tactical victories, demonstrating that in naval warfare, innovation, bravery, and relentless pressure could achieve results that traditional firepower alone might not accomplish. As the war in the Pacific entered its final months in 1945, PT boats continued to demonstrate their versatility and strategic value, operating in increasingly complex and dangerous environments. The liberation of the Philippine Islands required coordinated naval operations on a massive scale, and PT squadrons were tasked with a variety of missions, including escorting convoys, screening amphibious landings, interdicting enemy supply lines, and conducting reconnaissance along hostile coastlines. Their ability to navigate shallow waters and operate under the cover of darkness made them ideal for targeting Japanese barges and small vessels attempting to reinforce or resupply isolated garrisons, a task that larger warships could not perform effectively. During the late Gulf campaign, PT boats performed daring night patrols along the western approaches, intercepting Japanese barges laden with troops and supplies. These engagements often involved rapid maneuvers, sudden bursts of gunfire, and high-speed torpedo attacks that left the enemy little time to react. While the scale of destruction inflicted by PT boats did not compare to major surface fleet engagements, their cumulative impact was significant, consistently disrupting Japanese logistics and reducing the flow of reinforcements to critical battle zones. In addition to direct combat, PT boats played a crucial role in reconnaissance operations that informed Allied planning and tactical decisions. Crews would silently observe enemy coastal activity, map navigational hazards, and gather intelligence on troop movements and fortifications. The information they provided often influenced the timing and approach of amphibious assaults, allowing Allied commanders to minimize casualties and maximize the effectiveness of landing operations. The challenges of operating these small, fast vessels remained intense. PT boat crews were constantly exposed to enemy gunfire, mines, and the unpredictable conditions of tropical waters. Engines required frequent maintenance due to the high demands of extended high-speed operations, and the wooden hulls offered little protection against damage. Yet the men who served aboard these boats adapted to these hardships with resilience and skill, forming tight-knit teams capable of executing complex maneuvers under extreme pressure. Beyond their tactical contributions, PT boats had a profound psychological effect on the Japanese military. The unpredictable presence of small, fast attackers forced Japanese commanders to devote significant resources to night patrols, convoy escorts, and defensive measures that otherwise could have been used to reinforce front-line positions. This constant threat disrupted planning and imposed a degree of operational caution that hindered Japanese flexibility. One of the most famous stories to emerge from this period was the continued legacy of PT-109, commanded by then-Lieutenant John F. Kennedy. While the incident occurred earlier in 1943, it remained emblematic of the courage and ingenuity required of PT crews throughout the campaign. PT-109's collision and the subsequent survival and rescue of Kennedy and his crew highlighted both the vulnerabilities and extraordinary capabilities of these small craft and the men who manned them. By mid-1945, PT boats had become integral to the final stages of the Pacific Campaign, operating in tandem with larger naval and air forces to ensure control of key sea lanes and support the rapid advance of Allied forces. Their missions extended from direct attacks on enemy vessels to the insertion and extraction of intelligence operatives and the evacuation of wounded personnel, demonstrating remarkable operational flexibility. The cumulative effect of these efforts contributed to the isolation and eventual destruction of Japanese garrisons throughout the Philippines and other liberated territories. PT squadrons continued to innovate and adapt in response to evolving threats, employing new tactics such as coordinated multi-boat attacks, deceptive maneuvers, and combined operations with air support to enhance their effectiveness. Each successful mission reinforced the strategic value of small, fast, and highly maneuverable naval craft, challenging traditional assumptions about the dominance of heavily armored ships in controlling the seas. By the time Japan's surrender approached in August 1945, PT boats had firmly established a legacy as a force capable of influencing the outcome of naval operations through ingenuity, speed, and audacity. The men who had operated these small wooden vessels under extreme conditions demonstrated remarkable courage and resilience, achieving results that belied the modest size and armament of their boats. In reflecting on the role of PT boats in the Pacific theater, historians recognize their contribution not only in terms of tactical victories, but also in their broader impact on the conduct of naval warfare. Through persistent harassment, reconnaissance, and support of amphibious operations, PT boats played a crucial role in shaping the environment in which larger battleships, cruisers, and aircraft carriers could operate more effectively. Their legacy serves as a testament to the idea that in warfare, agility, innovation, and audacity can be as decisive as size and firepower, and that small forces operating with skill and determination can exert disproportionate influence on the outcome of major campaigns.
As the Pacific War drew to a close in the summer of 1945, PT boats continued to operate in the shadows, their crews performing a remarkable array of missions that underscored the strategic value of these small, fast vessels. From the Philippine archipelago to the Bismarck archipelago and beyond, PT squadrons provided critical support to advancing Allied forces, maintaining pressure on the Japanese Navy and reinforcing the broader strategy of isolating and neutralizing enemy positions. Their operations were marked by daring night attacks, relentless harassment of supply lines, and the insertion of reconnaissance and intelligence teams behind enemy lines. These missions required exceptional skill, courage, and situational awareness, as even minor errors could result in catastrophic damage or loss of life. Throughout these final campaigns, PT boats were frequently called upon to perform tasks that went beyond traditional naval engagement. They transported personnel, evacuated wounded soldiers, and supported amphibious landings by screening larger vessels and providing close-range fire support. Their shallow draft and agility allowed them to operate in areas inaccessible to larger ships, while their speed and stealth enabled them to strike and withdraw before the enemy could mount an effective response. Despite their effectiveness, the dangers of PT operations remained ever present. Crews faced treacherous reefs, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of enemy detection and attack. The wooden hulls offered limited protection against gunfire, and high-powered engines, while providing speed, could be a vulnerability if damaged. Yet, through disciplined training, innovative tactics, and sheer determination, PT boat crews continued to execute their missions with remarkable efficiency. The psychological impact of PT operations on Japanese forces cannot be overstated. The ever-present threat of sudden attacks from small, elusive vessels forced enemy commanders to divert resources to defensive measures and convoy protection, straining already overstretched supply lines and limiting their operational flexibility. By August 1945, the cumulative effect of these persistent operations had significantly weakened Japanese coastal and logistical capabilities, contributing to the overall success of the Allied advance across the Pacific. PT boats, once considered experimental and auxiliary craft, had proven themselves as a potent element of naval warfare, capable of influencing strategic outcomes far beyond their size and firepower. Their legacy endured not only through the missions they accomplished, but also through the men who served aboard them, young sailors and officers who demonstrated exceptional bravery, skill, and resilience under extraordinarily challenging conditions. Stories of heroism, such as the daring escapes, audacious night attacks, and the legendary tale of PT-109, highlighted the human element behind the wooden hulls and high-speed engines. These narratives became emblematic of the ingenuity and courage that characterized PT operations throughout the Pacific theater. In reflecting on the contributions of PT boats during World War II, it is clear that they redefined the role of small naval vessels in modern warfare. By leveraging speed, surprise, and tactical innovation, PT crews were able to challenge and disrupt a much larger and ostensibly superior adversary, demonstrating that agility and audacity could rival raw firepower in determining the course of conflict. As the war ended, many PT boats were decommissioned and crews returned to civilian life, carrying with them memories of intense combat, extraordinary camaraderie, and the knowledge that they had played a pivotal role in shaping the outcome of the Pacific War. Their operations left an enduring imprint on naval doctrine, inspiring future generations to recognize the value of versatility, initiative, and daring in maritime conflict. The story of America's secret PT boats striking from the shadows is a testament to the courage and innovation of those who served, illustrating how a relatively small and lightly armed force could create disproportionate strategic impact, shape enemy behavior, and help secure victory across a vast and challenging theater of war. In the end, the legacy of the PT boat crews serves as a powerful reminder that determination, skill, and creativity in warfare can transform modest tools into decisive instruments of victory, forever altering the course of history in ways that continue to